Hi, my name is Shane Burchall, and I'm going to do a video for my project because, as I probably just explained to you, I have trouble talking for long periods of time because my jaw muscles get tired and then I get difficult to understand. It's actually not the real reason. I'm actually just lazy and don't feel like doing it in class, but no one has to know that. So today I'm doing a project on blank verse poetry, and I figured I would start off by giving you just kind of a basic overview of blank verse, like they give you in Strand and Boland at the beginning of each chapter. Blank verse is written in iambic pentameter, which means that there's 5 feet in each line, with a total of 10 stresses, in the pattern of unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, and so on. However, there are often variations because it's difficult and kind of limiting for every line to have to be strictly iambic pentameter, so there'll often be variations thrown in. Another important detail about blank verse is that it's unrhymed, so that gives the poem a lot of freedom, which means that enjambment is often used. Blank verse is supposed to, or it does, emulate the rhythm of human speech because you have the bum 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 pattern to the rhythm. And so for this reason it's used a lot in dramatic speech and epic poetry, which are forms of literature that are supposed to, represent people talking. Okay, now for some history of the blank verse form. Blank verse came into English poetry through Italian literature. The Italians called it verse sciolti di rima, or something like that, which meant verse free of rhyme. And there was a lot of interest around this time during the Renaissance to find an unrhymed poetic line that would mimic the classical epic, because as you might know, during the Renaissance, that was a big thing for many poets, was to, revert back to the classics and to mimic them and recreate them. The form was invented by Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, who I'm sure you've heard of. He first established blank verse poetry in his translations of Virgil's Aeneid, or Aeneid, I don't know how to say it, which is dated around 1540. Howard's translations were really the only notable use of blank verse until Christopher Marlowe translated Book 1 of Lucan's Pharisacea, which came out after Marlowe had died in about 1600. This, in turn, was the only use of blank verse until Milton's Paradise Lost, which is commonly referred to when talking about blank verse. That was published in 1667. Milton's decision to use blank verse in Paradise Lost was so peculiar for the time that his printer actually asked him to explain it in the book. So Milton wrote the verse, which is basically an explanation of why he chose blank verse, and put it at the beginning of Paradise Lost the second time it was printed. In this explanation of blank verse, Milton gives himself credit for creating the first example of blank verse in English as being used for heroic poetry, which is kind of funny because he either didn't know about or ignored the accomplishments of Surrey and Marlowe. As I mentioned before, were both poets that used blank verse prior to Milton. Now I'm going to do a close reading of a poem that I found that's written in blank verse that really stuck out to me and impressed me. And so, first I'm going to read it. The poem is Rain by Edward Thomas, and it's on page 112 of your Strand and Boland book if you want to follow along. Rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak hut, and solitude and me, remembering again that I shall die, and neither hear the rain nor give it thanks, for washing me cleaner than I have been since I was born into this solitude. Blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon, but here I pray that none whom I once loved is dying tonight or lying still awake, solitary, listening to the rain, either in pain or thus in sympathy, helpless among the living and the dead, like cold water among broken reeds, myriads of broken reeds, all still and stiff, like me who have no love which this wild rain has not dissolved except the love of death, if love it be towards what is perfect, and cannot, the tempest tells me, disappoint. So before we dive into the poem, it's important just to note the background information. Edward Thomas was he actually enlisted to be in the United Kingdom's army for World War I. And so he wrote this poem before going to battle, but it tells the story of a soldier who is alone at war, and that's just important to keep in mind as we discuss it, that we're talking about a soldier at war and not just some random person in their house, although I'm sure it could also be read that way. This poem is written in blank verse, obviously, which works well for the purpose of the poem, which I believe is to express the solitude and, you know, the overwhelming sense of death that's surrounding the speaker as they lie there and listen to the rain. But the narrative nature of the blank verse works well because the reader gets the sense that they're inside the speaker's mind, you know, right there with the speaker as they ponder life and solitude and, you know, the inevitability of death. Thomas uses the image of rain to convey the larger idea of solitude. In the first two lines of the poem, they go, rain, midnight rain, nothing but the wild rain on this bleak hut, and solitude and me. So the speaker is focusing on nothing but the rain. He feels as if it's surrounding him, which is probably why Thomas chose to use the word rain 3 times in the first line of the poem. And then we get the word solitude. It's almost as if solitude is with the speaker. It's a physical thing in that small hut where the speaker is lying, and all he can do is focus on the sound of the rain that is surrounding the hut and filling up his mind. Thomas moves on to bring up the theme of death, which is another really big theme throughout this poem. he says, "Blessed are the dead that the rain rains upon. But here I pray that none whom I once loved is dying tonight, or lying still awake solitary, listening to the rain." So in this way, he's comparing the solitary of being alone, at war, like listening to the rain all by yourself, to being dead, basically. And he's saying that he wouldn't wish either upon anyone. The idea of death is further explored near the end of the poem, which is my favorite part of the poem, when Thomas says that he has no love, that the wild rain has, quote, not dissolved except the love of death. If love it be towards what is perfect, and cannot, the tempest tells me, disappoint. And so what he's saying is that he's lost all love in his life, basically, except his love of death, which really emphasizes how preoccupied with dying is, which I think says a lot about the mindset of a soldier. It's either about to go to war or in war. And his reason for why he only loves death is that I believe what it's saying is that death is the only perfect thing that can't disappoint. And so there's so much disappointment and letdowns in the world. Death is really the only thing that can't disappoint you, because when you're dead, you can't be disappointed. And so I just thought that was an interesting idea. I'm going to pause the video now, and I want to hear from you guys. Like, what is your favorite image of the poem, or what's your favorite part of the poem? And maybe if you have other ideas about, what things mean, let's talk about that. Look at that, I changed shirts. Now I'm going to read you guys a attempt at a blank verse poem that I've been working on. It's just my first draft. And I know it's not perfect blank verse, but blank verse is really difficult. So I'll have to work on it, but this is what I have so far. It's called Love. A steady rhythm beats against the walls inside my crowded skull. I'm either mad or had a heart attack, and now the blood is bringing oxygen to keep me breathing for a few more seconds. Am I breathing? Still breathing. To sleep perchance to end all dreaming. Need to focus on the sound of eardrums. Fuck, they thump heavy tonight. And there's the rub. My legs are numb because they're losing blood. I should have lost my sight by now, but it is tough to tell in the perfect darkness that I have come to love. It helps to pretend this doesn't happen every single night.